Today we join Elisha and Naaman by the Jordan River, Nahar Yarden. Now, chances are this didn't happen exactly here where I'm standing, but because there aren't many places where we can actually go and access the Jordan River, I like to share it over here. In addition, I also like that the water looks even murkier and less impressive than it probably did even back then, because it adds to the scenery and it helps to accentuate that message. The question that I really want to ask is why specifically the Jordan? Why does he tell him to go to the Yarden? Now, if the idea is mikvah, and that's what's going to help him, so then really, Naaman is right. Any water will do. And he certainly has better water options than what you're looking at behind me. Why specifically here then? We have to keep in mind, we don't get extra credit if the mikvah is really gross. Okay. Now it's true. We're not going for physical cleanliness, we're going for spiritual cleanliness. So it doesn't mean that it doesn't work if the water is not clean, but why do that? Now, to understand Naaman's response even a little more, we have to understand and remember what Damascus is, where he comes from. Damascus is an oasis. Basically, in that area, you have a desert. In fact, it's a rain shadow desert because the area of Damascus is to the east of not only the Lebanon Ridge, but the anti-Lebanon Ridge. To put that in perspective, here in Israel, when we're traveling through the Jordan Valley, that means that we're going through a portion of the Syrian African Rift. And you may have heard of this. In fact, we mentioned it in the past program, and also if you've ever done any traveling around Israel, so you may have heard that term, the Syrian African Rift. But we often associate that, even though it says it has the name Syria and Africa in it, we often associate that specifically with the Jordan Valley because that's the part of it that we usually travel through. But of course, it continues from one area to the other beyond the state of Israel. What that means is that valley, on the one side, we have to the west, we have the mountains of Yehuda and then the Shomron. To the east, we have the mountains of Jordan and then the Gilad. But if we continue north, that valley actually continues beyond the borders of the current state of Israel. Okay, you also it continues even to the north, but we're not going to go into that as much for the moment. Beyond that, you have the valley called the Bekaa Valley between the Lebanon Ridge to the west and the anti-Lebanon Ridge to the east, including the Hermon. And Damascus is even to the east of that. Meaning, what we have here is a rain shadow desert, just like we have in the area of the Judean desert. We've spoken a little bit about what a rain shadow desert is. Again, that means that precipitation is coming from the west. And as it climbs to the mountains, it cools and condenses. It rains out whatever moisture it actually does have. And then once it passes the mountain peaks, it can actually go down, it can drop. And that means that it can heat up and it can expand and it can actually hold more water, except we don't have more water to hold because that water is coming from the west, from the Mediterranean. It already rained it out. So we don't have more water to really pick up. And so we end up in a desert over here, not like in the Negev desert, which is based on its lines of latitude, part of the worldwide Sahara chain. But here, it's because of the mountains that it had to pass between the water source and the current area. So that's our rain shadow desert. And so what that means is Damascus has the same thing. Damascus, that whole region over there, is a desert, making it very difficult to pass through. But Damascus has a couple of springs coming from the mountains. If it rains up in the mountains, some of that water gets absorbed down through the mountains, and then you have springs down at the foot of the mountains, including the rivers of Amana and Parpar, which are considerably large springs and rivers that come from those springs. And that's in essence what made Damascus such a strong area, because those important international routes that are passing through the area, they're going to basically have to pass through Damascus if they're coming to the east of those mountains, because that's the main oasis where they're going to be able to refuel. That really is what gave Damascus what it was, and through till today, basically. Okay, and because of that, Damascus came a at least secondary power in the area, much like ourselves. Now, that being the case, if you have these nice big water sources over there, and it even gives them that's kind of their pride of the area. So then to come here and say, hey, go jump in a lake, or in this case, a river, the Jordan River, he might say, I could do that back home. I really don't need that advice. And especially when I look at this little river. Apparently, he wasn't very impressed by the Jordan River based on what he comes from. And in fact, we actually have a similar attitude from Mark Twain when he comes, Innocents Abroad. He comes here to the land of, at that time, what was known as Palestine, and he sees the Jordan River, and he was not very impressed. He's like, this is where the story happened. This is what it's all about. That's what they had to cross. Keeping in mind, he's writing about the Mississippi River, okay? And he's like, that's a river. Here, what is this? Okay, so for us, this is a river because that's what we got. And it is a considerable river for the region, more or less. It's not the Nile, but it's not bad, but either way, compared to some of the rivers that some of these other people are coming from, we can understand why they're not as impressed. And it seems that Naaman has a very similar response to it. But where is that response really coming from? It's coming from a place of gaiva or arrogance. We see this throughout his interaction. The first thing he does when he comes is he sends a messenger to go to the Navi and he expects him to come out to him. And he's very insulted when he just gets a messenger back, which is Elisha saying, okay, you send a message to me, I send a message back to you. Go jump in a lake or river, like we said. And he gets very insulted. He's like, I expected him to come out to address me personally, to wave his arms around and say Hashem's name, and that's something, and that's it. That's going to cure me. We insulted his pride, basically. And exactly what Elisha planned to do, because that's exactly what he needed. In essence, what he needed was to be able to drop that arrogance. That's what brought about the tzaraas, and we'll talk about that again in a minute. So he sends a response back to him, and at first he's like, "I'm out of here. I don't need this." And they said, "You know, you would have done something difficult. This isn't all that difficult. Why are you making things complicated? Just do what the Navi says." So he begrudgingly does it, and he can't believe it. It actually works. It actually makes his skin smooth as a baby. What happened here? Why did it get rid of his saras? Because it humbled him. And he, in essence, had to humble himself. He wanted an immediate solution, and he was too good for the Jordan River. But that's the point. He had to go to the Yarden. The Yarden is mentioned, its name perhaps comes from Yored Midan. It comes down from the springs of Dan, which is one of the main springs or tributaries of the Jordan River. It's not the only one, but it's one of the big ones, right at the foot of the Hermon. There are three big main tributaries to the Jordan River, and all three of them basically come from that area, not exactly down, but from that area. So that's where it gets its name. And in essence, Yerida itself, meaning he's going down in stature for himself and going into this water, which wasn't as impressive as where he comes from. And he had to really be able to overcome his own gaiva and his own arrogance just to be able to follow the words of the Navi. And he does it. And it ends up working. The arrogance that leads to Lashon Hara can lead to tsaras. And the same thing by the greed that comes from that arrogance, which is what we see by Gehazi, who ends up getting the leprosy that Naaman loses. And in essence, it causes a rift between a person and those around him, and in a sense, even between that person and his own true self.